All right, today we are talking about mise-en-scene. Sometimes people say mise-en-scene. It's pronounced mise-en-scene, but either way works. It doesn't really matter. I pronounce things wrong all the time, so it's all good. This is kind of like, I always say this is like the catch-all of film in terms of kind of all these different components that come together that are necessary to make the film. That's kind of a good way to think of it. So let's go to here. Let me pull this down real quick here. All right. So if we just start with, what is, right, mise-en-scene, so that we, I mean, I can say catch-all, but I suppose I should make sure we clarify what that catch-all means. What it literally, like the interpretation of the word is essentially like putting into a scene, right? Whatever is needed to be put into that scene, for, in this case, film and stuff, then those are part of those components. So we could say, this includes, right, the set, the lighting, it's gonna costume, and we could put the costume, makeup, and hair. I mean, you could put these, a lot of times, like costume, makeup, and hair are put together. This is the type of structure of props. So there's a couple different types of props. This could be, and this is part of set design and stuff, but I'm putting it separately because we're going to talk about it separately, which includes product placement, use of props, paying attention to where the props are. Like a lot of these there's a lot of components to it, in terms of like what each of these entails that we're going to look at and stuff that way. So I mean, those are the big ones, with set, lighting, CGI. CGI is another one of those that goes on there, which again could go under sets, but it also is its own separate technology and stuff that way too. It's the basic thing of covering, like, the way I mentioned it is everything that goes into a scene of a film, right? All those different things that you need to have a film. That's what mise-en-scene covers. So the first thing we're going to look at is our sets. Now there's two types. Well, I mean three, I guess, if you count CGI as separate, but the two main types are within studio, or on location. And a lot of films use both of these. There's obviously some films that it's all studio. I can't think of any film that's all location. There's always some scenes that have to be filmed in studio. But there are some films that are entirely filmed in studio. So on location, you may have a film that has a lot on location, but you almost always have to have, there's at least some scenes that are done in the studio, even if, let's say, 90% of the film was on location. And there's differences and benefits to all of this that we're going to look at on, like, with the studio versus on location. And the set is a huge thing. If we're looking at as a collaborative work, right, with who's involved, right? This is the art department. I'll write department once. They're all departments. I'm not going to write department for each one. So you have the art department as, move up. All right, there we go. Got stuck there for a second. Construction and paint, right? You have to build the sets, paint them. Set decoration. This is going to be where you have like the props and things like that. And like I said, you not only have to like the person that's responsible for the set, you have to they usually take pictures and stuff, and lots and lots of copious notes. You have to pay attention to everything, right? The crazy thing with this is like you don't film in order in a movie. Like, it's not in chronological order that we see the film at. There's different scenes are filmed at different times for a variety of reasons. When you can get on location, when you can have studio access, when you have these actors available, what technology or stuff you're using for two different scenes, but you only have the time to rent that or have that equipment for that day, then you have to film those two scenes that use that equipment. There's a lot of different reasons. But what it means is that there'll be scenes that are shot, or even just reshoots later, that you have to go back and fix something. And so you if you take a shot and then like 3 weeks later you come back to that, you're not going to remember where the vase was, or where the glass of water, or how much water was in the glass, or what the clock's time was set to, or how dirty the clothes of the actor were, if it, like say a zombie movie, right? How much blood and dirt and gore was on that particular outfit at that time? How was their hair styled and messy and makeup and all these things? Like, there is this, that the decoration, all of these aspects and stuff, but like they all come together, and you have to pay like crazy attention to these kind of the most minute detail, to make sure that there's it's kind of seamless, which there is a whole thing about people trying to find the mistakes in the films, which I feel like you work so hard to keep it seamless, and then there's these people just nitpicking away. Out of an hour and 30-minute 2-hour film, you screwed up 3 times where, look, the cup of water is slightly below where it was in the previous shot, and you're like, oh my gosh. I can imagine the frustration of having someone do that, and you're like, it's barely noticeable if you aren't hunting for it, kind of thing. Versus, of course, like the Starbucks cup in the TV show Game of Thrones, that was a big oversight, right? There's little things that are just, one little thing gets by, versus a big oversight of no one noticing, and no one noticing in editing that was a Starbucks cup there. Anyway, so you guys, we'll talk more about props and stuff with that. Property department is another. And then location department, they're the ones responsible for scouting locations to film. And then special effects, right? Almost all films, even what's crazy with special effects these days, because there was a difference in older movies and special effects that were, tricks of the camera. There's a good one with Charlie Chaplin, where it looks like he's roller skating right up to the edge of a building that has a significant drop off. But it's actually just a painting on the floor, on a wood, right? And so he rolls right up to it and then pretends he's falling back, but there was never a hole there. But it's clever trick of the, how what the camera shows and what we see, it looks real. And then they have props and physical actual things that they utilize to do these tricks. Again, a lot with tricks with camera and editing. But now we have CGI and technology that allows us to add in scenes, people, animals, everything into a film in pretty good realism these days. You look at some of the older films at the big advent of CGI, and it's a little bit cringe and painful to watch now. And I'm sure, in 20 years, they'll say that about where we're at. But it's gotten a lot better, and to the point that people often don't realize, that there's still, even in a film where you're like, hey, that was like the Office scene, the Wolf of Wall Street, right? That you'd think, oh, that's straightforward. There's not a lot of crazy scenes that need CGI, and yet they do have CGI in it, and even so, like, obviously, like, I think most people know, like, superhero movies. And anything with like crazy action and things like that are going to have CGI, sci-fi, fantasy, right? You're like, oh yeah, of course, those have CGI. We obviously don't have a spaceship that's being filmed in location in space, right? But that even just basic, drama set in current modern time often uses CGI to fill out the space. So it's pretty much in everything these days. But it can be from very small to a significant chunk of the film itself. Sometimes for good reason, sometimes for it's seen as easier to do. Sometimes it's out of necessity. There's critique of, there's still directors who really like to have physical stuff present. That the belief, and there's different opinions on this, but this belief that like you produce better acting from the actors if there's something physical and tangible there. Now they'll just sometimes do that with like this stuffed animal represents this we made this stuffed thing that represents the size of what we're going to CGI in. And so at least you have something there that you can like see. A lot of times it's just like a golf ball, a tennis ball on a stick. There's their head, so you know where your eye line is. Because that's one of the most important things with CGI is if you don't have the eye line, then they're always looking off. And you're like, you can tell, like, yeah, they're not actually looking at that person. That's CGI. So the eye line is incredibly important. If nothing else, you have to have that designated somewhere. But there are other directors who think that the more that you can build actual sets, the more that you can build actual, things like Jurassic Park. Again, not the new ones, but was really good CGI. But the animatronics of those dinosaurs that they closely interact with. Obviously, they put other stuff in the background, but the ones that they closely interact with, that they were animatronic, partial dinosaurs. And Spielberg even said the idea of that he believed that the ability of actors to interact and feel and engage with stuff on set when they're shooting produce better acting. And then there's others that use CGI for almost everything, and it's a very different experience as an actor, how you approach it as well. But that was a long-winded way of saying right, that it's in pretty much, just assume it's in everything. The question is, can you tell, right? And there's obviously, again, the obvious ones. Oh, Superman's flying. Clearly there's CGI involved somewhere in there, creating the background, if nothing else. But then there's the more subtle ones, or even like in Moonlight, like where can you tell is there's CGI and special effects used and stuff like that. And it's when it's minor stuff, it's really hard to tell. When they're doing small changes and it's normal life, right? Where we're not like, duh, obviously people can't do that, so CGI. Or other special effects, right? But and it's the day-to-day life stuff. You're like, well, that's perfectly, people do that in their regular life, and they don't use special effects. We tend to then think, okay, they didn't use special effects when they actually did. So that's something to pay attention to when you're looking at films like that. Is like, where does that come in, right? Okay. For the next thing, then, set design and structure. You don't just, I'll put it as design here, right? You have to have a starting point for design, right? You can't just show up and be like, all right, make a home. Every tiny nuanced detail is like set up ahead of time. And it doesn't mean that they don't maybe add stuff on the fly when they're like, oh, we're missing something. Yes, this would be perfect here. But that you have a starting point of essentially trying to design the sets before any shooting takes place, even sometimes before determining location and what's going to be in studio versus on location. And so you have sets are sketched, or computer programs are used to design it. Or sometimes even built miniatures, right, with clay or other types of products and stuff like that. The most common is sketched, so that you actually have what's called a storyboard. And the storyboard does two things, right? It can do more than two, but two of the key things is it sets up the story. And the plot and the narrative and the structure, right? Like, is this coherent, and then it allows for that initial set design, which is going to have, again, the costumes, the props, the things that you're going to need. It's going to give you a visual cue of what's being envisioned, right? Okay, so for this set, then when the people that are in charge of the sets come in, they can say, okay, this set is going to require these components. Well, we want to do that in studio, okay? And then here's the vision. And then you go to the people that are going to construct the scene. You go to the painters. You go to the costume, and you get all those things that basically brings that storyboard drawing to life. And it evolves and stuff from the initial sketch to, of course, drawing boards. Directors, designers work on all of. Basically, this is this visual language of the film, right? It's not, they don't have the writing, they don't have the words and the what the actors are going to say on this. This is the visual language of the film. And setting it up and preparing it and stuff. So this is where you're going to get, where you're going to choose, where we could put, I guess, under here, right? The color palette of different scenes, right? And sets. The choice of patterns and materials that are going to be needed based on the mock-ups and stuff like that. Rooms and furnishings. Like, it's a tremendous task to get all this, right? And set up a whole film, right? It doesn't it takes much longer to create the entire film than it does to watch it. Not only with the editing part, which we haven't gotten to yet, that we'll talk about in the future, but just even the preparation to film. You can't just jump in after you have the script and start filming. There is all of this stuff that has to get sketched, approved, prepared, and this is incredibly important, right? We could put, we'll put it as E, I think, and stuff, right? That the setting is very important. And the reason for this is that it's the physical space of the film. It is going to help produce the mood and emotion. It's going to help set up significance, the size of, whatever's being filmed in that location. The size and space play a role in that structure. It can sometimes even, like, locations have cultural and psychological significance. Right? It's going to have impact on the characters and potentially impact on the audience as well, right? It helps make the film. Imagine having, like, a film that you like watching, and now change the setting to, and not let's say it's, there's whatever the big setting is, it's on location, and okay, I'll just take one, Lord of the Rings. You have Lord of the Rings, and you have these huge, like, on location pieces along with sets in New Zealand. They give this breathtaking view of this vast space because they're going on this journey, and it's meant to indicate that it's, a difficult, long journey. So if you had a different setting where, like, it was small and it felt confined, right? You're like, well, our journey is across the room. The whole epic nature of this journey gets shrunk down into this smaller size, and it detracts from the point of the story of the narrative, right? So it is important, but it's an interesting thought experiment of, like, trying to take a film you like and be like, what if I change the set completely? Or what if I put the set in one location? The movie Phone Booth tried that. There's a few films where they like that, where they have it. There's basically one main set, and there's a few peripherals, but the majority of the film takes place in this single set. Usually those films rely on the actors then, because they don't have a lot of else going on to help them. It all falls into it makes or breaks it based on the narrative and the actor. because now you've removed this component. The set can add so much with special effects, with explosions, with fight scenes, with moving around, with seeing different places. All that creates interest and generates, excitement in us. And if you now have none of that, everything gets wholly focused on the actor and the narrative of the film. But it's interesting to try to like reverse, right? So it'd be interesting, take phone booth, and then instead he's running around with a cell phone and having to go to different locations, for whatever is before, get shot or something like that, a similar aspect like that, right? But that would change the whole dynamic of the movie. The intensity, the tension, the almost despair at times, right? Does that go away because the set has now changed? That you could argue if poor set choices do that, they can influence the film to end up in a much more kind of negative space, essentially. Okay, and and we're talking about important. Yeah, those are the big ones, the characters and things like that. Okay, so we looking at location. And hang on. Sorry, got something in my throat. There we go. I think I cleared out. I was gonna pause it rather than cough on camera, but apparently I was too slow for that. Apologize. All right. We're looking at this set design, right? Settings in general. We're gonna look at studio and on location. So let's look at. I'll just keep it within this structure here. Sets on location. And there's a variety of reasons to do this. What's interesting, right, is if you look at early film history. I'm writing most here, but like it was virtually all films in early film history, right, were done on location. And one of the main reasons for this was because of lighting, right? The early cameras required significant light sources, and the electric lights and types of lights were not there yet to work well. So they required natural light to be bright enough to film. That's what was so impactful about the Black Maria, was that they created this film studio that could open on the roof, and you could rotate the whole studio to catch the natural light, so you could film in studio. That was the level of what was necessary to film in studio versus on location. This is also the reason why California, and specifically what becomes Hollywood, became the center of film, because that region, Southern California, has a ton of different locations that mimic different places. So you can, in one, not even the whole state, in Southern California, you can have a desert region where the desert that can replicate foreign, alien planets. It could be foreign locations too. Desert scenes. And then you have the ocean and the beach. You have a farmland. You have forest area not too far away. If you go towards Tahoe, right, there's mountains. And all of these locations give a massive, diverse option to what you can film, what you can change the on-set location to be. And then in Southern California specifically, the weather, that generally is pretty sunny and mild, is super beneficial for filming, because of course cameras couldn't get wet back then and you needed the light source for the sun. All of that led to the almost all films. Again, there was the Black Maria studio, but those were few and far between. The early stuff was filmed on location. Now, this the difficulties with filming sets on location, right, is let's call it challenges that you have. Is one, of course, is that you have to find locations that work. But I would say like that's the easy step out of the whole thing. You have to then also you have to be able to pay what's usually, I don't want to say fees, like that basically, yeah, you have to pay for filming on the location. So let's say you know New Zealand is a popular one, especially for fantasy. And you have to, you know, there's often taxes and things like that, and we could put taxes separately too, because you have to take into account and wages. Each state, right, and each country has different taxes and wage rules, and if you're filming in that location, then you're obligated to follow that. Now, some places, countries, or states will compete and give the federal government tax breaks and stuff like that, but like that still is a consideration that you have to take. All right, I got interrupted by my child. So I'm trying to remember where I was at. I was talking about taxes and wages, and that you have to follow state or country laws. I'm pretty sure that's where I left off. If I repeat something, I apologize. So the key with this is that location shooting can get expensive. Of course, there are also limitations on what you can build, right? So depending, and not just build, say what you can build or destroy. Depending on like your location, right? There's certain regulations on buildings, damage to natural resources. So if you're trying to do like a chase scene where a car blows up, or you're shooting, we want to be in this location and we're going to have these explosions, depending on like if it's a historical site, you may not be allowed to do that, which is where then they'll shoot, and then they'll shoot the actual explosion stuff in studio. Ideally, you can just shoot what you can shoot on location, but there are rules, there are restrictions, there is money that has to be considered, and so these things all do require a significant amount of thought on whether or not to do location. And I would argue that more movies have started using studio because of the increase in technology and size and scope of what can be done in studio and house. That, I mean, obviously there's still stuff that does location work and stuff like that, and when it makes it easier or cheaper or just provides some kind of cinematography, I can speak tonight, that has a value, right? Well, then sure, they'll do that and stuff. But if it's literally just like, well, this would be cool, but we can replicate this in studio, so yeah, and it's cheaper and it's more flexible, right? There's a usually time limit, so we could put that too. Time limits, like if you, let's say you're filming on the freeway, like LA will close down. LA's traffic sucks on normal days, right? But there's like set times they'll let them close down, and you have a very limited amount of time that you can film on the freeway and stuff like that. So you have these restrictions with time limits and things like that too. I mean, that one's a very narrow restriction example, but even in bigger locations, they'd be like, well, sure, but we're having this festival that's coming in on this date, so you got to be wrapped up by this time. Right, where if you're doing it in the studio, then you have more flexibility. The thing with as location, like a benefit of it, is that it often creates more of a realistic setting. That realism comes into play, right? You don't have to create CGI for the backdrop, because you have the natural beauty. It's why people like New Zealand so much, is because it's so beautiful, and it has these perfect scenes. Oh, I had these backwards. So here, let's look at these real quick with this. So one of the things that this is interesting is that there are certain locations that if they're film friendly, or they're known places to be good to shoot, they will be used multiple times. So this was a good example of showing how there's the rock formation, right? That in Friends and then in Star Trek, the same set is used. Here, the crown. This is obviously like the palace, fancy kind of location, right? It looks like Versailles a little bit, but it's meant to replicate like a palace kind of structure with the tile, with the kind of huge ceilings and things like that. So it makes sense that you repurpose that, some of it, like this is permanent. Actually, in most of these, it looks like it's just they've kept it the same. And then in True Lies and Avengers, right, for, interestingly enough, the same, it's that cargo space scene. But so even on location places will often be reused once the word gets out in Hollywood, essentially, that these are good locations to shoot, and you can adapt them to how you want it to be. Here, this is in New Zealand, and what they're filming with one of the Lord of the Rings series. I think this might have been with the Hobbits and stuff like that. Here is Jumanji on location. Those are the two examples and stuff that way. But what New Zealand has, and that can be useful, is that you have these wide open spaces, lots of diverse nature components, so that if you're going on a journey, right, or they're going here, like this is a perfect backdrop for that, like again, that jungle safari kind of thing that they're trying to create here. You've got these mountains, you've got these natural backdrops that fit the scene, and really the whole setting and narrative of the film, for example, in this specific Jumanji. Or again, the fact that you need untouched nature locations if you're going into the world of, if you're not doing it in studio, then you know obviously you can't have modern day stuff in your sets for Lord of the Rings. And there went a plane, there went a car, there's a telephone. Well, there's no telephone booths anymore, but I don't know. There's a park bench that's totally modern and a kid's playground. Those things don't work. It takes it out of scene. You have, and you could digitally remove them if there was a perfect location and that was present. But there's just so many of these perfect locations in New Zealand that can be used, that just are nature. And so it's not surprising that those get, especially again, fantasy. Fantasy shows love New Zealand for filming because of the kind of diversity that it provides. All right, so that's the on location. We'll come back and look at the set. I don't have too many with studio examples, but actually, since we're on it, and I'm already over here, we'll go back and show it afterwards. So studios, sets in studios, right? What are the kind of differences and stuff that can do that? Well, one, it's like a blank slate, right? This obviously, like with the Black Maria studio, that was pretty small. There were limitations in size, but in today you have massive warehouse after warehouse that really, and then the back lots and stuff. So we'll say large interior spaces, let's call it that. And then with back lots, so that if you need the open space and things like that, right? You don't have the limitations of size that you used to have, even like if you talk like, you know, up to about classical Hollywood era, there was limitations in size with the studio, but that doesn't really exist today. And so you have a blank slate to create what you want. It can be configured to and easily adapted in any kind of method or structure that you want to do to fit your narrative and to fit that structure. You know, the earliest movie sets were like with Trip to the Moon, which was more play-like. It was, you know, that it was these singular kind of sets of everyone looking head on, like you would do with a play. The backgrounds were painted. In Wizard of Oz, right? The background when they're walking on the yellow brick road is painted, and it's just that first part there and stuff like that. And that was much more like plays. And then obviously over time you've had the technology, with an increase in technology that allows for complete transformation. the other thing that's beneficial with on set is the fact that the time and availability, right? This is, you can take your time shooting. You're not restricted to time, of like, oh, this is only available for you for these few days. You can go in and film at night, so they're not beholden to weather conditions, right? You can go in, or time of day. You can go in at night. You can go in when it's pouring down rain, when you need it to be sunny. You can go in when it's sunny and make it pouring down rain. It doesn't matter. It just is this. So this, all of this is, I guess, what would be the flexibility that the on location doesn't necessarily provide, and it can create a whole bunch of different looks and styles. And in many cases, they're only creating usually just creating the facade of a structure. You know, in Universal Studios, they have they call it a ride, but it's loosely a ride, but it's a tour of the studio essentially. Because right, Universal Studios, sure, they have the rides and the activities and stuff, but it's actually also working sets. And so you take the little bus thing, and it takes you through the back lots in the Universal Studios, where they actually have two different, like, kind of fake pre-made streets set up with different diverse sets of architecture and styles. And lots of movies use that. So you've got, and they're right next to the studio. That's what I'm talking about with the back lot. I should have put a picture in there of that. I didn't. And what's cool about this, if you do ever go to Universal Studios and you haven't done this, you should, because not only do you get to see, like, behind the scenes of, like, where the studios are and their back lots with these designed cities that are kind of blank slates outside of the buildings and things like that. Then, right, the set director and designers, they bring everything else in, and it's crazy to me that they can take and you from this one set, transform it into a 1950s film, and then the next scene, it's a sci-fi futuristic film, and it's just by what are you placing inside, or not inside, but what are you placing on the outside, right? The type of cars you're going to put on the road, the type of trash cans, what kind of decorations are you going to put in. All of that then transforms these kind of basic sets that are meant to just have diverse architecture into what you want to do. But what's cool is it actually takes you through this scene where it shows how they do flooding scenes in towns. And then there's another one with, like, a subway train kind of thing in that way. So, like, it gives you a background into some of the special effects, into the studio, into setting, backlot settings and design, stage design. It's a fun, again, I wouldn't really call it a ride, even though they do, but it's a very cool background look into some of what goes on. And occasionally, if you go at the right time, you can actually see people filming, which is kind of fun too. Anyways, if you're ever going to Universal Studios, I don't remember what it's called. I'm assuming, like, it's like a bus. You get on a trolley bus thing, and it takes you on the studio tour. I think it might be called a studio tour, but you definitely highly recommend it. Okay, let's look here. I'll just show you the couple. I don't have a lot of pictures for the studio, and we're gonna talk about CGI next, so I can show that too. This one I like, though, because it gives a good top-down view of what you can see, right? They don't have a roof, and I would argue that this one's even built out more, and there's different reasons for this. Sometimes it depends on how you're filming, and you need to be able to be walking through multiple different rooms. You know, so they'll have this. There's ones where they talk about where they show, like, a stairs to upstairs, but of course they don't build a second story. Like, this part here could be the bottom floor, and then this part here could be the upper floor. And you just start to go up the stairs and then it fades out, right? And then you film the other scenes on what's the upper floor, but you're just next to it and stuff like that, right? And then of course it's not fully built out and complete because it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be that facade is kind of the key there of what they're doing. Here's another good example of I would even say less, right? This is pretty built out for a set for a housing for a house, right? More than what this is often more common here, right? You don't have all four walls. You have a door that this is the backstage back here that goes to the door that they could come in from, right? But this is it. That's what you have. And as long as you know how you have the cameras and positioning, it looks like someone's room. You don't need more than that for those scenes, right? And that's how they determine how much to build out in a set. Is basically what, like when they've drawn out the storyboard, is like what are we gonna do in this location in this set, and so how much do we actually need? Like how much of a building do we need? How much of a room do we need? Do we need connecting rooms, or can we have them as separate? Are we gonna have a shot that films them continuously walking from one to the other with no editing? Then you need to have the adjoining rooms versus like two different sets and things like that. And then, of course, in studio, the use of the green screen, which gets us to the CGI, which allows for, a lot of different special effects and background editing. And again, it can be simple to more complex. And I'll show these ones now since we're here before we look at CGI. And then I do have a quick video to show with it too. One that actually shows like what it looks like before the CGI is put in. This was a good one. I like this one too, right? Though, so look, you can see when they're all running in that final scene in Avengers to attack, they're on the treadmills running, and then this is what all of that background and them running on ground, right, is put in after the fact. So they have to act while they're running on these treadmills. And you can see Bucky's arm here. That's the vibranium arm and stuff. He has to have a green sleeve so that they can manipulate that and put that on after the fact. So he has just a little, so that you can see there's a little piece of it, right? That's silver. That's what's done after. His whole arm, though, is actually the green sleeve. So you have, it definitely is a lot more imagination in terms of this with acting. Now, this is an older one, but it's useful to show the various levels of what they can then do in terms of green screen. Green screen isn't something new. It's been around for a long time, as evident here. So you want Superman flying. He's got the wires. They've got different blowers to blow like air, so it looks like there's air resistance as he's flying. You have people over here in full body suits helping to use the wires to move him as he flies. So that, and then this guy is also controlling the wires too, and so all of that's helping control. And then what they do is, right, the green screen gets edited into a background, the wires get edited out, and Superman is flying. That's the more basic technology, right? One of the things that has become far more popular and active is motion capture. And so they have these motion capture suits that have not only this camera that's recording the face, and you can kind of see here, right? That's not splotches on his face, those are dots. And then they've got these sensors here, and they're on the head, on the body, and sometimes they're covered in quite a lot. And so what this does is it captures all your facial movement and motion, thus motion capture. And the idea is that, right, he was the actor then for Caesar for Planet of the Apes. And so Caesar's then is created by CGI. Right, but it's his facial expressions, his movement, his reaction to things is actually based on what was captured from this actor as he's going through the scenes, right? So that like people will act with him as Caesar through the whole thing, and he will go through it as if he is acting. He's acting out the scenes as Caesar, right? That's his what he's doing, and then it's after in post production that they're then converting that into CGI to make it an ape rather than a person in a suit. But the motion capture was a big up. That technology was a huge shift from just green screen where you have background, like right where really the like within Superman, the main what's getting edited is just the background CGI. So it's background where you images and stuff. So you're just putting some background video in to full on CGI creation of an ape based on the movements, and motion capture became a big thing in helping do that, and making it more realistic. It wasn't there wasn't something that they could do before, but the level of realism significantly increases when you have real facial expression in reaction to events that you otherwise wouldn't have. Right? Okay. So let's put here CGI then. Oops. And special effects. All right, so what CGI means is computer generated imagery. Well, it still looks like a G. There we go. I could get the G there. And so what this is of course it's done in post-production. Right, it's computer generated content, but it allows filmmakers to fabricate a set. Essentially, you can create your own set. The limits pre-CGI special effects and stuff, like, and especially when they got to the point that you could do this, right? There was extreme limitation on having to actually build or find these sets that replicated what you wanted. And the reality is now with CGI, if you don't find exactly the kind of set you want, you use a base as the foundation, and then you just add the CGI to it to create the visual impact that you want. That's why when I was saying that a lot of films that you wouldn't think have CGI and special effects do, that's why, because they're tweaking slightly sometimes even things that they want, because they want each set has a specific ambiance and mood and feel and visual idea. And if you can't find the exact one, or it just doesn't make sense to build out the whole thing when you can just tweak the smaller components on the foundation to fit what you want, to fit the narrative and stuff like that. But obviously, right, with this, the actor performs in front of, it doesn't always have to be a green screen, of a single color screen. Now, the two that are most commonly used is obviously the green screen. Basically that are you going to shoot in green screen? Even if it's a blue screen, that kind of became synonymous with it. But blue is also one that's used. Green and blue are the two common types of screens, single color screens that are used that then allow you to impose other things on it, which is why they always say, like, don't wear green and take a picture if you're going to put it on the internet, because then everyone can superimpose images onto that green, solid green shirt that you're wearing. They did that with the Queen Elizabeth when she wore like a whole green suit. And it's been done on with like other actors or performers and stuff who end up wearing green, and you just open yourself up to being able to Photoshop on there super easily. Like it obviously can be done with other things too, but it just makes it easy to shift that in. And like I said, so, and some of it is also for, there's the creation aspect. There's also the idea of, fixing small issues in previously filmed stuff, right? So if we didn't notice that, the color is off here. Well, the special effects can change the color and tone for that that image. Oh, the set is missing like something. Like I feel like we shot this whole film and we're done, but the set, it just feels like this one set piece here is missing something. Well, then you can add it in after the fact. You don't have to go reshoot the whole thing. Another good example is the Zack Snyder, I think it was, movie with the zombies in Vegas. Yeah, I'm really bad at film names. Yeah, apparently I suck at I can tell you the whole plot and everything that happens in this film, and I can't remember the name of the film. But anyways, it's the zombies in Las Vegas, and Tig Notaro, an actress, she ends up replacing this other guy due to controversy with the actor. And so they filmed all her stuff and basically in green screen, with minus just a few scenes where there was too much interaction for her not to be involved. And then they put her in with CGI and put her into the film. Now, the argument is, how good is it? Well, one of the benefits was her character is off by themselves a lot of the time. And that's helpful because those scenes were perfectly fine because they just filmed them right and put them in. If it was just one person she was interacting with, it was also fine. But there was a couple of scenes where it was the whole group and they didn't do a good job. She looks smaller than everyone else, and not just by her nature of her size. It looks awkward in placement, and then she's never they got the sight lines not correct, and that makes sense too because there was like 8+ people in that shot, and that's why they did some where they reshot stuff, and because it's really hard when you start getting more and more people. So there were scenes that were good. You wouldn't have ever known that she was digitally put in later after the film, actually putting it over and replacing the actor that had shot those scenes. And then there were ones that weren't as good. But the fact that you can do this, they did this with All the Money too. I remember that title and stuff, which was also due to actor scandal, which is usually the case when you're having to replace and stuff like that. And replaced in all of those scenes after the fact, filming some on location, some on set, some with green screen and digitally imposing them. And it's a way that wasn't available in the past. That is a significant benefit in all of that. Okay, now we're going to look at props. This all is still sets and stuff. We can both do props as a separate thing. What, I have 2, so we'll do 3. Technically props. Oops, didn't mean to make that bigger. Oh, it's going to be off now. All right. Try to keep it. The writing here is similar. We're on 3 here. Props. So technically props could go under sets as well, but I'm just going to set this its own thing. So, right, the people that are called the set dressers, they're responsible for putting the kind of final stages on the set. First was the construction workers that built the main sets, right? And then you have the set dressers, and this is stuff like, right, what is included in this? I mean, it's anything: lamps, paintings, photographs, kitchenware, equipment, photos, books, whatever is being used on set, right? Now, we'll say like the purpose of props. There's several. Come on. There we go. One is that it's just simply in the background to make the set more realistic, right? You're not going to have a bedroom with nothing in it. And I mean, they're occasionally like to show usually the pathology of someone, like, you know, oh, what's this sterile room where it doesn't look lived in? But if you're trying to create a natural scene of like a teenager's room, they're going to have a lot of crap. And then there's going to be posters on the wall. There's going to be stuff on the floor. So the clothes that are made to look like dirty laundry, to the books on the desk with the computer, to the posters on the wall, those are all props. And I'd say, what, 90% of props, I'm making up a number here, a good chunk of the props we're not really meant to think about. It's meant to be in the background, and it's there to make it more realistic, because you don't, if we always went into, you know, watching something and the rooms were always stark empty, even a teenager's one, you'd be like, what? That's wrong. Like, that doesn't look realistic. I give a good example of this. Mary Poppins, and they're going down this supposedly street in London, and there's no one else there, right? And immediately when you see that scene, it's like that. It feels like a set. It doesn't feel real because they didn't. And that's actors and characters rather than props, right? They needed people, but it's the same kind of idea, right? Where they didn't put any the actors that were extras to just be milling around, and so you're like, why is there no one on the street in the supposed like main part of London, and the same thing can happen with props, where like you like said, what's wrong with this teenager? But that's also the power of props, right? Is that props provide clues to the character, right? If we're introduced to a teenager's room, or anyone's room that isn't like they just moved in, or it's a motel, and you go in and there's nothing personal there, your first thing is, what's wrong with them, right? There's got to be there's got to be something wrong or unusual, of why they have nothing personal in the room. Why does it not look lived in? And that's used to reinforce those ideas, right? So in that case, the lack of props is used. But you can also use props to reinforce that we have preconceived notions about if a room has a bunch of skateboards in it, right? Okay, that person is a skateboarder. Or this person's like, this type of character because they obviously like to skateboard. Well, those props helped push you to that conclusion, because we're always observing and making assumptions based on the visual cue, and props are part of that, even if most of the time they're just background noise and we don't notice them. We certainly notice the lack of them in that case. Okay, and then another thing is that props can be central to the story. And one more, but we're going to come back to this one. Props as product placement, right? Ads, got to make money for the film somehow. You do advertisements, not as commercials, but with product placement. We're going to come back to that one specifically, though. We're going to look at these other ones here. Let's see. Let's give an example here. So, in central props as central to the story. Here's one that we've watched: Sherlock Jr., right? Buster Keaton. And with Buster Keaton, one of the kind of key scenes when he's Sherlock Jr. rather than his, hapless self, if you will, is the explosive cue ball. Right, in this scene, we see, right, you have, and this is, I'll put this part right here. This was the part of an extended gag, right, that comes full circle back to the bad guys at the end. Okay, and it's used for comedy. It's used to confuse the bad guys. It's used to stop the bad guys. The bad guys plant it, so they if we can show. Here's the one I have. Oh, I didn't put the other one in. That's okay. It was one showing where they were placing it. Before this, there we go. Before this scene, right, where he's playing, we see a shot of the bad guys trying to prevent Sherlock Jr. from figuring things out. So they show them putting this explosive cue ball and replacing it. And then it goes to, Buster Keaton's character, who picks up the 13 cue ball and starts throwing it up and down while the bad guys are like, and like, hiding and like flinching because they expect it to explode, but it doesn't. And then they're confused and they look at each other like, huh? But then he puts it down to play, right? And then so they get confident again. Oh, okay, well, he's gonna hit the ball right. So they're watching as he's pocketing these balls and getting closer to getting the 13, and they're just waiting with anticipation for it to explode on him. and he finally hits the 13 cue ball and nothing happens. So then again, they're super confused. This then comes full circle when a chase scene where he's being chased by the bad guys, he pulls the 13 cue ball out of his pocket, and we realize that he had switched them with sleight of hand all along, and tosses the cue ball at the guys, and it explodes their car and makes them go off and crash, and he goes happily ever after with his girl. This is, right, not only an extended scene with a prop, but like it comes back around to it. But that prop is central to the whole gag that's taking place with that film. And then you have, of course, other ones that are movie props that become iconic. And I'll write some of this down in a minute, but I do want to show you these. So, like, of course, like, this one doesn't show here, but it's a Wilson. He calls him Wilson, right? His name is Wilson. It's a Wilson volleyball. And Indiana Jones, I'd say not just the golden statue, but the whip became a huge prop that was iconic, or even the hat. You could argue everything about Indiana Jones that he wears, the costume, the props, right? It all became kind of iconic. People could very much identify if I put on a hat, a brown leather jacket, a messenger bag, and had a whip, people would be like, oh yeah, Indiana Jones. Because his character is so kind of iconic. Well, the whip is a good prop that gives it away. The idol's pretty famous too, in that sense. So you have these props that are, and this one, I mean, the idol's not central to the whole film. His whip is part of his character, so that's important. The volleyball is central in the character in Castaway because he has no one to talk to and he was slowly going crazy. So this became a lifeline for that. Right, and so the props don't always have to be intentionally the center thing. For example, Jurassic Park shaving cream. It is part of the plot and the idea of how he was going to sneak the dinosaurs off the island. And it becomes like, representative of him being killed when the shaving cream rolls down and then stops while he's getting attacked by the little tiny cute dinosaurs until they attack. So it signals his kind of attack and death. But it became kind of symbolic of Jurassic Park. So much so that they started advertising on the shaving cream bottles with Jurassic Park. They made replica safes from shaving cream. It became iconic even though it wasn't essential. It was a prop that was important for a few scenes. But then it's not in the rest of the film. So it is not a central prop. And yet it became one of those kind of key iconic ones. So it could be intentional or non-intentional, right? It's unintentional. It doesn't have to be on purpose, essentially, right? It can just happen. I also thought it's interesting where you can see props and what they used. We tend to think of I do at least, of props being these fancy things that they recreate. And the reality is sometimes they're making things out that you wouldn't ever want to actually wear or use or everyday items. So with Luke Skywalker, his pants were just bleached Levi jeans. There's nothing else special about it. This one, the communicator was a Gillette razor. And there's another scene where it's super obvious too that it's just a modified razor. Some were more developed than others. And that leads to bad props that we'll talk about too. But to me, it's surprising how they're able to change things. Now, there's also examples of bad things that they clearly didn't change well. And so that can take you out of the scene, right? Here, let's go back. We'll come back to this in a minute, right? That you can have, we had purpose of props and stuff like that, but good and bad props, right? So good props aid the scene, right? They play a role that improves the film. Versus bad props take you out of the fantasy. and story of the film. Right? So you don't want bad props because they actually can then, any kind of disbelief or imagination that you were sucked into the film, that you kind of forget about everything else around you, and then you see a laughably bad prop and you're like, right? That fantasy of this film being real disappears, right? And then there's props that become iconic, that become instantly recognizable for that character, for that film. I'll put a couple down. We looked at some and stuff that way. So I mentioned the shaving cream for, come on. I mentioned the shaving cream for Jurassic Park and Star Trek. Right, you have the communicator and the badge. I think both of those are very recognizable things. With Thanos, right, in Avengers, you have his gauntlet, the glove with the stones, lightsabers in Star Wars. And I mean, I'll do a couple more. You could keep going. The red balloon in It, right? Doesn't take much for someone to hold a red balloon in a way that's sort of like, oh, that's it, right? The ruby slippers in The Wizard of Oz, right? Those are big. And we'll do one more. The golden ticket in Willy Wonka would be a good one. And these are just ones like, okay, like what comes to my head is I'm thinking about, what do I think about where I'm like, oh, I know, like, when I did Indiana Jones, I talked about already, so. Indiana Jones, there's several. The whip, the hat, his jacket, the idol, right? There's, his journal. I always think of his journal. That he references and stuff from that, like, right? So there's tons, and the good props, no, they don't have to become iconic. Good props don't have to be iconic. It just is sometimes they do, because either they're central to the story or it caught on for some reason, right? It became this kind of important thing. But again, the key is that good props enhance the scene. Bad props take you out of it, right? Bad props essentially stand out when they're not supposed to. And I think I forgot to put the pictures in for this one. Did I? Let me see if I found the fake baby. Did I put that one in? Oh, here we go. It got moved though. It shouldn't have been with product placement. This is one of the best. Actually, I think this one is the fake baby in American Sniper. It was laughably horrible, but babies are hard because if they're trying to show newborns, they're using newborns most of the time. So you have babies. Now there is technology to create pretty realistic babies, but this was not one of those like re-dolls that looks real. This was like a plastic baby, and it was so fake. And I was watching a TV show just the other day, Seals, and that also had a baby scene in it. And again, it was so clearly not a real baby, and it just takes any of that emotion and feeling that you had. It takes it out. It just removes it. You're like, all of that, it creates such a disconnect, right? And then it becomes a meme and people make fun of it, and it does the opposite of what you wanted it to do in your film. And there's, so the one is the ways that bad props happen is right, the fake. I think I think the baby is always hard. Like, out of all the, so many times when they've used fake babies, it's obvious, and it doesn't go well. So obviously that's a hard one because just of using an infant. But then there's another good example of, come on here. Then, and now this one, it doesn't want to let me right here. The knife in Terminator 2. I say the knife, like you know what the knife is. There's one fight scene where this guy's fighting Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he tries to stab him with a knife. Now, granted, he's metal, but if it was a real knife, it wouldn't bend and wobble, and it would snap, right? Or it would just bounce off. But the knife, the blade itself would not be bent in half. And instead of having a retractable knife, because obviously they didn't want it to go in, pretend like it was going into him because it was metal, but they just used a rubber one, and so actor, apparently with a little too much force than was needed, pretended to knife Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then the knife bent. And in a way that it wouldn't do, and then of course that took out a little bit of the fight scene there, if you noticed it. And again, it was very quick. People usually got pointed out later. Another one is one with a movie we just watched, which was In Time. Right, there is the car crash, where they go down the it's not a ditch, but the drainage thing, and it's the car with Justin Timberlake and the other girl in it. But as it starts to roll down the canal, it clearly is a toy car in one scene before then it lands at the bottom of the canal or canal ditch or whatever, right? So like it becomes laughable in this sense of like they didn't do a good enough job shooting it and using the prop to be realistic. And so consequently, like, it looks fake because it is, and that's the whole point of trying to avoid that. You could also argue with In Time too. One of the other props was just the cars in general. Like, there is something that questions, like, if this is supposed to be in the future, why do the cars all look like they're from the 50s, 60s era? Nothing looks modern within that. And you can say, well, it just depends on which time zone you're in, and that's why. But like if you start questioning things because of a prop, right, then that is, do we want them to be questioning that, or is this doing something we didn't intend it to do, right? So that's the issue with bad props and stuff. Then again, the other one is just accidents, right? So the Starbucks cup wasn't meant to be a prop, and that's obviously a TV show, but you could have accidents of props being in there that weren't supposed to be in there. Or again, as I mentioned, like, you don't put the prop right exactly back the way it was when you shot it earlier, and so then the prop becomes noticeable even though it was just meant to be a background thing before. Those can be issues with it too. And then we also have props as product placements. Okay, so this is where they're advertising, using props to advertise to generate money. I mean, because that the truth is, movies are funded by advertising. This is the most popular way to do it now, because films are very expensive. Again, those big blockbuster films are very expensive to make, and one of the ways to offset costs and be able to pay for everything, as well as some of it's just to mitigate potential losses, is to put product placement into your film. And it can range from good to bad, just like props itself, and it can range from like calling it out to having it be there but not be so obvious, right? So here we can be good or bad, and can also, you can either point it out and be obvious about it. Now, where this is most used is with comedy, right? Comedy, that genre allows you to make fun of product placement. It would be awkward if you had like a horror film and the killer pauses to point out product placement, right? That would break the whole scene of and mood of what you were going for. Or you can have it just like props, which are meant to be somewhat blended in, right? Because of course the key, like background props, sometimes you don't even really want people to notice, right? They're just there to set the ambiance essentially of the room. But of course with this, the idea is you still need to make the money for advertising, and they paid to have their product used and seen, right? So if you make it too invisible, that might cause tension with the companies that were giving the movie money to do it, right? So it does vary. Some examples of this, well, one that is that they intentionally make fun of it is Wayne's World. In Wayne's World, you have a couple different scenes, and they don't just like show it. Obviously, like they wrote script for it to make fun of it. Like it's intentionally obvious to be part of the comedy. So one is with Garth, and he is dressed fully in Reebok, right, and head to toe in Reebok. And what he ends up saying with this is he says, people only do things because they're going to get paid. Right? And it's meant to, make fun of the product placement. And then you have Wayne, who is eating from a Pizza Hut box, right? And he's not eating a Pizza Hut box. He's eating from a Pizza Hut box, right? And he says, contract or no, I will never. I will not. No, I will never sell out. I will not bow to sponsors. When he's clearly bowing to sponsors with that placement, right? So in this case, right, it's being used in a comedic way, and they're pointing it out, and it works well. Sometimes people do this and it doesn't come off well. It just kind of depends. Castaway is a good example of two main products that are used, right? FedEx and Wilson for the volleyball and stuff like that. And this one, like, he's a FedEx carrier, so you see him in uniform, you see the FedEx logo on the plane, and then you see FedEx on the boxes that wash up on the island after he crashes. And this, like, so it's central, whether they had this planned, and then they got FedEx on board, or they added FedEx into it, right? Or whether it was all created around FedEx's sponsorship, or they already had it planned and it could have been a generic airline carrier delivery system, and they shifted it to FedEx. It could have gone either way. But the whole film was fit around that. And there are some people that say it's egregious. I don't feel like that one is, because it feels like it's part of the story. It doesn't feel like they're trying to sell FedEx. It just feels like it makes sense that he was this is why he was on this plane to begin with, because he was delivering with FedEx. And then the fortuitous nature of having FedEx boxes wash up from the plane crash, because that's what was on your plane, was a bunch of FedEx packages, which helped him survive. And then Wilson, that he named Wilson because of the product of the volleyball, right? That it just fit with that. You have another one that's a good example is in Back to the Future. You have, there's a couple different things, but the one that kind of stands out with this is Nike, their self-lacing shoes, right? You get really good shots of that product placement in there, right? And then if we put, here we'll say some bad examples, right? In a product placement and stuff that way. Essentially, bad examples is usually too much of the same product, right? Where you are repeatedly hit with a product over and over and over again. That type of thing is it feels like it's in your face, right? You keep shoving this product in our face. Oh my gosh. And once again, we're seeing this product. So you have to be careful. And too much of the same product, too many different products, right? There is a balance to how many products that you have as product placement. Again, if it's too much, it gets shoved in your space, and then it detracts from that. So there's a couple examples. Oh, and then besides too many, just bad products for the film, right? And that can be this one for example can be, we'll give this one an example. It's not consistent with the character. So there's two examples of this. One is James Bond in one of the more recent, I think it was Skyfall. He drinks a beer, a Heineken beer, instead of his martini, shaken not stirred. That is his iconic drink. I'll take a martini, shaken not stirred. And instead he goes for a beer, and it jars you out of like what is already accepted about who James Bond is, right? It's not consistent with his character. And then in Superman 2, they had cigarettes, Marlboro, that like that, I think. As this big huge billboard / like driving billboard, and it's just weird because it feels it's in your face. One, like it wasn't like it didn't come off as like a normal billboard. It was massive, and then of course Superman crashes through it. But also like there had been pushes of like Superman ads about anti-smoking. So again, it felt super inconsistent for his character that this was being promoted in there, and people, it was so obvious that people were aware that it was being promoted, and so that it's either not consistent with the character or it's just crappy. One that has too many of the same product. If we do A down here, and the example with that one is Spider-Man. And I think this is Spider-Man 2, where Sony had sponsored the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and Sony had sponsored a lot of the film and stuff, and there was just Sony products everywhere. Another example that's not just a specific film is Cars, where every single car is the same type. All right. My son has decided he can't sleep, and he keeps knocking on the door. I'm like, I'm still recording. With the Cars, the point of what I was making with the Cars, it doesn't have to be a specific movie, but like the films that do cars well, like whatever brand of car, makes sure that either they use different makes and models of the cars, or not make, model of the cars, but and they don't overdo it. So you need that diversity. If there's a lack of diversity, so that the same SUV, black SUV from the same company, and you see it over everyone in this world of this film is driving the same exact car, that's weird. Like, people don't all drive the same car. So that's like something that can stand out with it. The other is when they like are, like, oh, cool car. Oh, thanks. It's the blah, 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 and has this and this and this. And you're like, okay, you're just advertising it that way. Like, it can either be just too much of it or it's super obvious, right? There's just that variety of bad product placements. And I have some examples of that. So here is the FedEx, right? This one I mentioned that's kind of all encompassing, but I think works well. And then Wayne's World did it well too, where because it's a comedy, they're making fun of the product placement. But then you have the bad product placement here that I mentioned that just doesn't fit with their character. James Bond doesn't drink Heineken. They tried to make it like a thing, like, oh yeah, he does, right? Or even James Bond can change. And you're like, but it just feels forced. And if it's going to feel forced, then it's not going to work well with the movie. And then here's with Superman, it's very fuzzy picture, but of him breaking through the marble. It's like a truck, it looks like, that's carrying the cigarettes and stuff like that. But it's huge. Like, when you see the first scene of it, it's like in your face, this marble sign. And again, it just isn't consistent with his character because... Superman, they had because they'd been doing these like anti-smoking things with Superman at the time. It just felt like it shouldn't have fit and stuff. Okay, we're on 4 now. So now we're looking at costumes, makeup, and hair. So we'll put this as 4 costumes, makeup, and hair. Now, this is also super important because, you have the props now done. Like, now you have the people that have to be transformed, if you will, right? It's about transforming. That looks weird. It looks like when I'm resting on something, it's selecting it. Transforming the actor, right, into the character. And much like props, right, this can be not very noticeable to very obvious. It depends, of course, what the character is and stuff like that. Where it's most obvious, right, is there's certain films that you're obviously going to have a lot more makeup and prosthesis and other things like that. So, for example, horror films, historical films where it's, older types of dress, the period pieces, and science fiction. These tend to be the most obvious, where we notice the costumes, the hairstyle, the makeup, because of the type of movies it is. But of course, then you also have where it is also most obvious, but isn't. This one's like a kind of mix of that, is with prosthetics. And with prosthetics and stuff, you like the ones where it's obvious, okay, is going to be monsters and zombies. Because we know it's a human actor, right? But in order to create them as something else, you're using the prosthetics to do that. But it can also not be obvious when it's well done, where like it's showing aging and a person looks naturally like someone else or older age, and it turns out that they actually are using prosthetics to create that adaptation and change. So it can work. It can be both subtle or obvious in nature. One of the things, and I'll show an example of that and stuff. One of the things with costumes, hair, and makeup that I think a lot of times we don't think about is that it is also that it's a visual shorthand for the characters. We judge in life and in film based on clothing, hairstyle, things like that, right? So that we can naturally start to make judgments. Start to make judgments about several different things, right? Social standing, popularity, wealth, occupation, right? That we start to take an idea of the character based on those things, even if again it's subtle to where you're like not even thinking about the clothes that they're wearing, but even if we're not consciously saying, okay, what I'm observing the clothing that this character is wearing, we still are naturally, because we're inundated with this stuff, right? We see visual representations, visual cues, right, on a regular basis. And that can be we could put, just daily life, if it's meant to reflect, like if the film is about current times. And even if it's not, we still sometimes take on like our view of like what someone who looks wealthy is going to dress like, and you have that idea. But so daily life is one, paintings, photos, these things we see from historical to modern social media, right? All of these things create what we could say is an expectation for looks. And then that's going to help us drive and understand the character. Now, what's interesting with this is that set dressers also use this to be inspired as well. Historical costumes often use paintings of the real person and what they were wearing. If you have it, if you don't have a painting or a photograph of the real person, then people from that time period. So at least you can get an idea of find someone of the same social standing and the clothes that we're wearing during that time. A good example of this is with Marie Antoinette, and there's the movie with Kirsten Dunst, and so they used a painting of her to be inspired with clothing, hairstyle, makeup, and attitude. Attitude or character, right? Your personality. So let's look at those. Okay, here. So here is the here is the painting, right? Which gives you an idea of, and this was this fancy, extremely lavish dress. This was not the common dress of this time, but for the wealthy in the French court, it was. You can get an idea of hairstyle and makeup from this. And then this is this is Kirsten Dunst as Marie Antoinette. Now, they didn't just straight copy, right? One of the things you could say is, oh, well, they could have just made that dress. But they didn't want, so some period films, that's what they would have wanted to do, is recreate it as much and close as possible. But others, it's like you want the feel and the idea of it, but you don't want to just duplicate what you see. So you get her, hair and the hat that she had. You can see the blush on the cheeks, which was also on the painting. you have this light colored dress. It's not quite as puffy as the painting. And then in this scene, right, she's laid back, kicked back, being served with all of these pastries around in this kind of lavish, decadent style, right? And they were inspired from that, from this painting. Other costume stuff that you can see, the Hunger Games is actually a really good example of that, because in Hunger Games it gave a difference between like the capital and the districts, right? And the districts were very basic clothing versus the capital that was everything. The hair, you knew who someone was from the capital by their clothing, hair, and makeup. You knew people from the district because of the lack of those things. And it was a distinguishing feature of people from the capital versus the districts. It was also a distinguishing feature of people who were wealthy and haves not. And it created actually an almost physical separation between these two groups of people. That the people from the districts could not understand, and everything looked foreign to them from people that were in the capital. Because it was not part of their existence, and you felt that by it feeling foreign and weird when they first arrive in the capital. It felt excessively decadent, which is what the author and then the filmmaker were going for, and that's all down to costume, makeup, and hairstyle, and just that those distinguishing factors being something that then can create all of this within that. Like Hunger Games is a great example of that use of costume. And then of course you've got like superhero costumes, right? We have expectations for superhero films that they're going to have kind of elaborate costumes that reflect and help them use whatever powers or abilities that they have. And that is common. And then of course with Wakanda, they play on that not only with traditional African style of clothing and dress, but then with the whole idea of being technologically advanced, so that their clothing is going to look more unique and different than other areas in Africa because they have all this wealth and technology that puts them far ahead of everyone else, and that includes within clothing style as well. I think The Princess Diaries is also another good one that showcases this, of how it's meant to showcase this idea of transformation. I mean, this is always kind of made into a joke too, because it's obvious. I mean, it's meant to be obvious, but it's so superficial, right? But we still understand this transformation, right? She's supposed to be this kind of geeky nerd that's not pretty, I guess, and before she has her makeover, once she learns that she's a princess. And then this is supposed to be her princess, design, face. And then now for the clothing, it doesn't change for part of it because she has to wear a school uniform. But then they have her dress up later as well. But like they do this in a lot of films where it's like the supposed like unattractive, geeky person who is actually, well, good looking even with whatever they're having them do, gets transformed and updone with hair and makeup, right? And of course, glasses tend to be a easy prop that can be provided or removed to suggest that difference, right? They show her putting in contacts. But the idea of like, oh, that frizzy or curly hair is not acceptable is very common trope. And it's the long, straight flowing hair, which again that has other implications and cultural expectations of why that is problematic, and always showcasing it that way versus just unkempt. It's meant to try to claim unkempt, but it tends to then just be, oh, it's if you have curly hair, frizzy hair, then that's not beautiful, and that's inaccurate in that sense as well. But we can see this and say, oh, right, pre-transformation, post-transformation, and the idea that she has somehow now improved her station and status because she's now a princess through this makeover, and people recognize it. We recognize it. People in the film recognize it, right? That all of this becomes super powerful in that structure. And then this is just prosthetic examples of how, they transform people. Here you have the White King in Game of Thrones, right? Where he starts here. This is one right? So it's the stages 2, 3, and final stage. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2, 3, and 4, and final stage. Like, prosthetic work is so impressive. I'll put up a link. I've totally realized I forgot to show you the CGI one, which just showcases what it looks like before and after CGI. So I'm not going to show it at this point because it just interrupts the final things we're talking about here. I'll add that to the lecture notes and sources. I'll put a link to a video too that shows they transform someone into a zombie. The amount of talent and artistry that this takes, it's really, really impressive. But it's also just impressive how different someone can look when you do it. Now, but again, prosthetics are an example of the makeup being obvious, right? No one's questioning that. However, that isn't always the case, because in this one here, you have in aging, right? The difference here with this is heavy prosthetics, right? It's meant to be seen. It's meant to be obvious. This is more nuanced and natural to showcase Ben Stiller looking older. This, though, is really well done. Like, there's definitely been some films where it's not very well done and it's pretty obvious, which then again can take you out of the film and stuff. This one is really, really well done. But they were light on it, and then they used makeup to, the whole point was to not have it look like he's wearing any prosthetics of any kind. It's just he aged, right? Versus these ones, these are supposed to be visual things that you see. But again, there's levels of talent and ability that people have of how realistic these look. But it's very impressive what they can do today with this to change, right? To create a whole kind of different system. Let's put that on here though, just so we have it here. Oops. Right, so with prosthetics and stuff, the idea of right, this is synthetic material attached to the body, right, to transform the look. It can be obvious because, right, they're not human. Is one of the biggest things of when it's not obvious. Zombies, not humans and stuff. But it's meant to create this artificial skin so that it looks. The idea is that we see that as, right, they are not human now, right? It creates a different look, so that can be for aging, which we saw. It can be for wounds. A lot of the times when you're seeing wounds in films and stuff, those have prosthetics that are, they don't have to be super big. You can change body shape, right? I mentioned be not human. I'm going to put zombies as his own category because that one's so much used and stuff, right? Or zombies. Okay, and then lastly, and I know as always it's getting long, so let's look at lighting real quick. I'll try to not be super long on this one. Lighting is super important because it can do several things. It can set the mood and tone of a scene, right? If you were trying to have a happy-go-lucky scene and it's dark with lots of underlighting, you failed. It's going to create this kind of dreary, otherworldly kind of feel, scary feel, or at least dark and serious. But you're trying to be happy and chipper about it. Like the way that light, with type of light that's used often sets the mood for that scene. It also directs our eyes to certain portions. Oops. Of the frame in the shot, right? So depending on where you have light, if a good lighting artist can use that to direct us to where they want us to see. It can help us shape our impression of the characters, right? Again, you can kind of make a character feel ominous or bad or evil or good and honest based on lighting, right? So it's a huge thing, and every shot we see has different lighting, right? And has been, painstakingly thought out and prepared and placed and set up. So like it's super important system. The main type is 3-point lighting, okay? And I'll show a picture of the setup of how this works. This is like the fundamental style of lighting, right? It's 3-point lighting. It's the one that kind of lights up the subject the best. And so it's why it's used, because it provides usually the light that's needed for the main subject. And that allows us to have the best shots from this. And then what you can do with this, and I'm not gonna write too much more because again I know I'm getting long here, and so I'm gonna try to just get this finished with this. Here, let me just show you. But you do want to know 3-point lighting, okay? So not only is it in your book, but I'm talking about it now, and it has it on here where it has the fill light, key light. Let me write that though, backlight, okay? So these are ones you need to know: fill light, backlight, and key light. Okay, so make sure you know what those are, even though I'm not writing out the full thing, they're here too. So you have the camera and your main person of focus, right? The key light is actually often usually like higher and shining on the person. The backlight then brings some brightness to it, and the fill light fills in any darker areas or shadows that otherwise might be there. That's kind of the shorthand of that. And again, this is important because this is one of the ways that kind of sets up the correct or the most stable brightness for things. However, you can play with the key light and the fill light if you want to create more or less contrast between dark and light, right? So depending on the type of mood you're going for, lighting directors will, like I said, move back the fill light or decrease the fill light or change the height of the backlight or key light or even the angle sometimes of the lights in order to create the contrast and structure that they want to do. Now, 3-point lighting was often used in classical Hollywood because, again, it creates that perfect light. And the example of this is with Rita Hayworth. And so there is essentially this idea of the best flattering halo effect is what they call it. And it's 3-point lighting creates the most flattering look, but not always realistic. Okay. And this is a good example of this. So this shot was taken with 3-point lighting, and it kind of creates this glow. You see the glow, the highlight on the hair, and here. I mean, you can almost see the light source right there, right? So you've got it coming from here, and then down from there, which is kind of bouncing off and stuff. This creates this kind of glow and gives her the most flattering look. And this makes sense for the scene. She was generally known as the femme fatale character, where like, right, women were so beautiful that she led men to ruin. So they of course want her to look as beautiful and fully illuminated face that creates this kind of halo aura around her because it fits the femme fatale perfectly. Again, it's also it is the most flattering light, so it's why 3-point kind of is that standard for that. And then this just shows you a really good view of like different lighting types and what can happen depending on whether you're using, you know, backlight, key light, fill light, and how, or the 3-point lighting and stuff, right? And that each level you get to then the brighter structure. And then you also have underlighting. So underlighting is, because the 3-point lighting is the most common, but there's other types of lighting. Low key lighting, you know, can be used to create high contrast, and it creates a sense of tension. So let me put that low key, right? Contrast and tension. And then you also have underlighting, which you can see where the light source is. It's literally as it says. The light is here shining out and it's coming up by your chin. You don't have a lot of backlight. You might have a little bit of key light and stuff, but the main lighting source is actually coming from that underlighting. This is used in horror films. It's meant to create a sense of scary or dread, distorted, unsettling kind of structure. And then on top of that, you also have tinted lights that will really use these colored gels that you can place over the light. It's like a film. And you place these color gels over the lights and it creates color tint, and you can use that to play with like the mood and theme, right? So like blues are more likely to be, like, it goes with the color scheme thing. So blues tend to be colder, cool colors or feeling, and that tends to be like depression, moody, like having emotion, cool waves. You know, it's like, what do you associate with the color blue and that type of thing? Well, that kind of fits in it. So if you have a lot of blue undertones, you're more likely to have a film that has a lot more serious emotion, potentially depressive or contemplative scenes, versus if you have red undertones, which can be love or blood, right? And that lust and danger is often set up, especially danger with light. Versus if you have really bright white lights, right? That is usually more awake, cheery, positive in general, right? So you can use color tones to reinforce the lighting style that you're using. Okay, I know I went fast on the lighting. Right, we'll say, well, I'm just going to put in here, like I said, most flattering over realistic, and the halo effect, because those are important things with that. And then I think the important things to look at are, to remember, is low key lighting and underlighting. And then lastly, what we talked about with tinted lights with color gels. So this will just provide, right, you see this, you can be like, oh yeah, this should jog your memory of what I just was talking about there. So I always go fast to the end because I'm like, oh no, it's so long of a lecture. But I want to make sure we got those things in. So we'll end there, and we're going to look at cinematography next week.